Very good, John. Welcome to the Cohort 7 Capstone Pitches. My name is Andrew Erdahl. I'm here to present you guys my game, Scarfell. So Scarfell is a single-player survival horror game infused with elements of action. It's set in a three-dimensional dark fantasy world. I think something along the lines of like The Witcher or Dragon Age in terms of the tone. So the game revolves around the interaction between light and dark. Think about when you're a kid, you're afraid of the dark. Why? Because you don't know what's there. Versus Scarfell, dig into that feeling of the fear of the unknown. Even today, we're afraid. Oh, are we going to get our financial aid on time? Are we going to get a job outside of 5? That's something that pervades our lives today. So Scarfell digs into that. Now, the fiction behind the game is that in ancient times, there was a war over the use of magic between these mages and warriors. And the sheer amount of killing and the reckless use of magic actually tears the veil, tears the fabric of this world. The mages are driven into this void. This creates the Shadow Realm. Now, the Shadow Realm, the continued animosity, the continued use of magic, it distorts the world and it perverts its people into these grotesque shadow monsters. Now, because of that, people in the natural realm still despise the use of magic, because they think any spells are going to tear open that veil between the worlds and allow the shadow beings back into the world. So anyone that shows any magical ability or inclination is immediately purged. That's where the game picks up. The players take the role of one of these unfortunate souls who happens to have magical abilities. The game starts in the middle of their impending execution. So the game follows players. Starts off with their getting executed. The emotion, the fear from this event causes them to accidentally tear the veil back open. And shadow monsters come and invade. So the game follows characters from this execution. They make their way from the site back through the forest and into the city, where they have to reach the top of the tower and light the beacon that drives the darkness back away. But how does this game actually play? From the onset of the game, the world is engulfed with shadows. Think of this as like a three-dimensional fog of war effect. Everything that's outside of this circle of light is draped behind a curtain of shadow. You can't see through it. The survival of the game is not based on hit points or health or anything like that. It's simply a matter of staying in the light. As long as you're in the light, you're safe. Once you get dragged into the shadows, that's when you die. So, light is provided by fire. Drag your attention over this wall, sorry, Tom. Fire provides a radius of safety which players can operate within. But the problem with fire is it dies out over time. So the longer players wait, the smaller and smaller that radius of light is going to be, until eventually it dies out altogether and the players die. So because this fire is constantly dying out, it forces players to keep moving in search of new objects to ignite and keep their flame alive. So once that flame dies out, you're dead. So players always have a torch. That allows them to transport fire and move through the shadows for brief periods of time. They're searching for objects such as braziers, which they can light, that provide a stationary radius of light. They're searching for vines and foliage that they can burn. Now, if I light fire, or if I light some vines, the fire is going to start consuming that foliage, and it's going to start moving. That allows you to get fire to places that are otherwise inaccessible. So the enemies in the game, because the game's not based off health or hit points, the attacks and behaviors of the enemy, they're based around pushing, dragging players into the shadow, kind of like what you saw happen to me over there. enemies can be dispersed by igniting them. But because the veil is open, they're going to come back and rematerialize after a couple seconds. So again, if I go back to this example here, you have this radius of light. These shadow monsters are going to be around the edges, trying to grab you, pull you in. And every once in a while, one of these monsters might just dart through and try and grab you. So you can see there's a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities for these monsters to, rush in, constant scare attacks, frighten the players, because that's what this game is about. So the different enemies in the game are based off of the strength of their connection to the natural realm. So for instance, shades, they're still gaining the physical form. They're stuck between, this physical, this ethereal form. So they're the most numerous, the most weak form of enemy. They focus on these melee attacks that, try and get players, drag them into the shadows. Wraiths, on the other hand, are a little stronger, a little more powerful. They've gained the use of magic. So they have, projectile attacks. And the thing that sets these wraiths apart is that from their shadows, they can spawn other shades. So it's up to the player with their torch, not to get too close, because it's going to cast shadows, and those things can be turned into other enemies. The most powerful enemies in the game are the demons. These are the generals, the leaders of the shadow people. They're gained their full physical form, all their magic. So these are the boss fights in the game. Really, the last thing I want to go over before I open up for questions is the idea of magic. The player is a magic user. So the rules of magic in Scarfell are a little bit different from your typical fantasy game. I can't just create things like materialize fire. I have to use objects and elements that are already in the game. So for instance, if I want to throw a fireball at Ron, because he keeps giving me bad grades in RPP or something, I can't just materialize this fire and throw it out. If I have another light source over here, I can take that light and throw it down on Ron, but there's no fire, so you're safe. However, there are penalties, there are limitations to your use of magic. For instance, in that example, if I take that fire and throw it, my fire source has lost fuel. But the more pressing matter is the more that I use fire, the less my connection to the natural realm becomes. So think of Lord of the Rings, when Frodo puts on that ring, he starts entering this wraith world. And it's the same concept in Scarfell. Once I start using magic, I enter into the shadow realm. I start seeing things that aren't normally there. And these enemies have a better line of vision of me, their line of sight increases, and they're more attracted to me. And if I'm too reckless with my use of magic, I'll actually enter entirely into the shadow realm. The enemies are inherently stronger and more dangerous. In order to escape, I have to find one of these tears in the veil and escape back into the natural realm. So these tears in the veil can be repaired using magic. It exposes the veil so that these enemies can't materialize, and it makes the world a little bit safer. And that would provide like a checkpoint for players. That about covers what I want to talk to you guys about. I want to thank my shadow creatures, John, Matt, and Andrew Bertino, as well as Jay, Aaron, Jacob, and everybody else who helped me out. So with that, I'll turn on the lights and open up for questions.